Hello and welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. My name is Dean Jones and I'm the Well Seasoned Librarian. I'd like to welcome you today for a very special podcast. It is Season 1, Episode 6. And today we are talking with Christine Parker and Ashley Lee. You may know them better as the Bitten Podcast. It was a pleasure to speak with both of them today, and I had a really good time asking them questions and finding out more about what makes their podcast tick. I think you'll enjoy it as well. So stay tuned for that conversation, and welcome. Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm Dean Jones, and today I'm talking with Christine Parker and Ashley Lee from the Bitten Podcast. Hello, Christine and Ashley. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
You know, I just wanted to say, to start off with before we go into the questions, I really love your podcast. And one of the things I like most about it is it was such a relief to me to know that there are people out there that think like I do and have the same things. So I was listening to your podcast talking about a series of unfortunate events and by Lemony Snicket and the pasta puttanesca part where you guys made the pasta puttanesca. And I remember that I was reading those to my son when he was small. I was a single parent, and he asked about it. And so I said, would you like to eat it? And he said, sure. And so I made pasta puttanesca for him. I found a recipe for it. I made it, and he was able to have that connection from the recipe to the written word, and I thought that was really cool. And then later on, we saw the movie with Jim Carrey where he said, "What did you call me?" So, so I thought it was neat that somebody else, like the Panyu talk that you guys had talking about the ramen and everything. That was very touching for me and my family. We talked about that the other day, and it was funny because I just listened to your podcast. Yet out of the blue, one of the kids brought it up and we talked about it. So it was like funny how these things, I think, ripple out into our society and they affect our consciousness.
Yeah. Those are some great experiences. That's so fun.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for being there and showing people that, you know, other people think of this stuff too. It's not just them. They're not alone. So I want to ask you both. So tell me about your backgrounds. Tell me about yourselves and how you came to create the podcast.
Well, so we're actually sisters. Ashley is older than I am, and we became really close around when I went to college, and most of what we bonded over was food and geeky things like Harry Potter and Doctor Who and stuff like that. So the idea for the podcast is honestly sort of just a natural extension of something we do all the time anyway. We're constantly sending each other, passages from books about food or talking about scenes in movies. And, one day Ashley just brought up the idea of doing the podcast about food from books. And then I extended it into movies and TV and video games. And I mean, it's just kind of like, that's just, I guess, who we are at our core.
Yeah.
Cool. So you both discuss books and film in detail. When you speak about the food in them, you seem to have a lot of depth and analysis of the work. Like, I don't feel like at any time that your podcast is pithy or superficial. Like, you guys really go in depth on it. How did you come about that? How did that evolve into the podcast? And do you think, this is, I think, more the way you thought, or you guys decided to do this? Was this a conscious decision for you?
I don't really actually think so. To be honest, our first episode was a little slapdash because it had been a long time since I had made that first suggestion. And Christine finally was like, so are we going to do this or what? And I was like, okay, well, I guess we're going to do it. So she wrote up a script and we just kind of winged it. But just, I think, based on our conversational style, because we're so used to talking to each other and we talk like this normally, honestly, the podcast really is mostly just us talking. We don't share our scripts with each other before we record so that we have real reactions and real conversations. And we just find things interesting. So we like doing some research. We like thinking about how things, relate to each other. We like finding all of the little background knowledge tidbits, the things that people might not notice. And I don't know, we just kind of have fun with it. I think the formula for the podcast evolved as we kind of did it a few times. And now we have, a little bit where we talk about the history or the, background of the movie or the book or whatever it is we're talking about. We'll talk about the scene that has the food and how the food is important. And then we'll talk about the food itself and the history. And then we do our tasting. And I feel like it's kind of serendipity that it evolved that way and that it worked out so nicely when we didn't really plan it.
Now, you think because I think a lot of us wonder about things, but you guys take it a step further. Because I remember I'm a big fan, a huge fan. And I've seen every incarnation of the All Creatures Great and Small. And you guys touched on an interview recently, and you guys actually made the Yorkshire pudding. And you guys made me laugh so hard when you're talking about cooking food. And I just because that's such a huge show for me. And I just love all that. I've even read the books. So I think it was so cool. But what did you guys, did it kind of bring it home to you guys a little bit more to kind of make the Yorkshire pudding and kind of connect that together and have that kind of sense memory or sensual experience that you could put in with a memory reading the books or watching the TV shows?
Yeah, well, I think talked about a little bit in that episode how our grandma made Yorkshire pudding growing up every Christmas. And so that was something that we had the experience with before, but our mom always talked about that food scene that we did where they cut the meat and they have that giant bowl of mashed potatoes and everything. And for me, at least in my mind, I had always just wanted to sit down and eat a rustic country meal like that, and so I think when you're eating like they eat in the books and in the movies and things like that, it kind of creates this sense of immersion. It kind of helps you get the feel, of what they're experiencing. And so it kind of brings it to life a little more. And I also really enjoy James Herriot, and I've read all his books as well. And so I feel like it, makes his world a little more real.
Yeah. Nice. Well, touching on that, there are a few YouTube bloggers that cover cooking dishes from books and film, like Binging with Babish, I think, and there's a few where they cook some of the foods or they imagine something from. I think there's quite a few bloggers that do that. So, did you guys, before you guys started the podcast and started doing some of this for the podcast, did you guys do this in your own life? I know me personally, I was making butterbeer for my kids, making stuff from the Roald Dahl books, back when they were kids. So did you guys do this before?
So we did sometimes, before the podcast, make things from the books and movies and stuff. I really like to have themed parties, and for me, food is a big part of the immersion. I've always wanted to really have a party about, from the Sofia Coppola Marie Antoinette movie. So there's a scene where they're trying on shoes and stuff, and they're eating the macarons and the candied orange and the millefeuilles and all the pastries. And I always just thought it'd be so fun to have that party, where everyone's dressed up and you're all, all eating that food and you're playing poker, whatever. And so for me, I don't know, the food is I've always wanted to eat the foods we see on screens and in books. But we knew about, people like Binging with Babish for years. And I always loved the concept of bringing fictional food to life. But yeah, I think I like the way we do it because I like that we get to kind of critique it, because I think that there are a lot of people who want to try the food, but they don't know if it's worth it to put in all the effort, or they don't know if it would even taste good. And so I feel like maybe this is a stupid service, but I feel like we're kind of doing a service of we made it and we tried it to tell you whether or not it's worth making and trying.
Yeah. In our house, we have a Harry Potter party every July 31st, and we make cockroach clusters and butterbeer cookies, which are amazing. We have a British-inspired dinner. We'll have bangers and mash or something like that. So that's something that we like to do. But I also sometimes read aloud a lot to my kids, and sometimes we'll do a day afterwards where we'll do some activities and make the food. For example, a few years ago, we read The Secret Garden out loud. And afterwards, we went to a botanical garden in Miami where we were living at the time and spent the day. And then we came home and we made the picnic that Mary and Dickon had in the secret garden. So it's fun for my kids, to have that food that they just heard about. They love to say, Mom, we should make that when we read books. So it is something that we've been doing for a long time.
Very nice. Since your show began, you've covered quite a few things from books and featured them in your podcast. What are your favorite meals or cooking experiences from your podcast, and what is your least favorite? Standout hit or misses.
Yeah, I think that my favorite, food-wise particularly, has been the boeuf bourguignon from our Julie and Julia episode, because we actually made Julia Child's, and it was like an all-day affair. It took hours and hours. It had a lot of steps, but the end was so worth it. It was amazingly delicious, and I see why people care about her recipes and why she, was so revered. So now I kind of want to try more of that. I think the low point for me was the sweet onion chicken teriyaki sandwiches from Subway. The chicken there has always grossed me out. I have never wanted to eat it, and I knew that it was going to be nasty, and I had to force it down anyway. In fact, I think Christine may have done this too, but when we went, I bought 2 sandwiches, the one that I would have gotten if I'd just been ordering myself, and then the chicken one. And I ate the chicken one and then saved the other one for lunch the next day so that my craving was satisfied.
I think for me, my favorite just tasting things so far has been the Nuka-Cola Quartz from Fallout. It was just this really delicious like vanilla soda. My least favorite probably had to be the sweet rolls from Skyrim, because they were supposed to be, I think, like a sweet pastry, and it just was kind of like eating iced bread.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
It's a little flavorless.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell from the podcast you guys are both avid readers. So what did you read growing up? What inspired you throughout your childhood and adulthood even? What have you guys have been getting into and reading? Like what kind of influenced you?
So I don't remember any specific books as a kid that like had a big influence on me. I didn't even really get into reading until like high school. I think when I was about 14 is when I really decided, like I want to read more, and I started reading, and now I read all the time. I remember though, at that point when I decided I wanted to read more, the book that I went and got from the store was Scarlet Letter, which I feel like is a weird place to start, for like building up a love of reading. But that's what worked for me. And so that kind of got me into classics, and then I got into like Harry Potter and tried out fantasy, and I went through a huge history phase. As an adult, I still love all of these genres, except I'm not as into fantasy. But I kind of came into my own only in the past probably a few years and realized that what I really love is nonfiction and memoirs, and then like popular science and pop culture. And that's the vast majority of what I read now. Which is funny because they're not usually a big place to find, fodder for this podcast.
Yeah.
They might be bad fodder.
Possibly. Yeah. For me, the biggest thing that I remember reading when I was younger were Goosebumps books. When I was in elementary school, I could not get my hands on those fast enough. I really also remember loving having assigned reading in English classes. I know so many people hate that, and I've read so many things that talk about you can't assign books because then it's like broccoli, But I actually really loved a lot of the books, including the Scarlet Letter. I wrote that down too on my own. I loved the language. I loved reading how the story developed. The first time I really feel like I felt affected by a book, though, was when I read Harry Potter, which was in high school, actually. The 4th book came out, and that's when I started reading them. I stole them all from my younger brother, and read the first 4 in a week because I just could not put them down. Now I still really love that kind of a genre. I love fantasy and I love science fiction. I love the good versus evil plot line. I do really still love the classics. I love, historical fiction. I just like a good, solid story.
This is not one of the scripted questions, but I'm curious anyway. Do either of you write yourselves? You guys write?
No, not really. My
Not
daughter
really.
kind of does, but
That's good.
yeah.
I think I did a lot when I was a kid. I remember having folders full of stories, but I haven't really as an adult.
Okay. Any cookbooks in the future though for you guys, maybe?
Maybe. I don't know. We'll have to see.
I can see from your Instagram account that you guys are both good cooks. What are your cooking inspirations right now? What do you like to cook?
Well, right now, I guess my inspirations have changed a lot. When I first got into cooking, it was a cookbook that my mom had, a Nigella Lawson cookbook called How to Be a Domestic Goddess. And my aunt and uncle had gotten it for my mom for Christmas one year, and she never cracked it open, at least as far as I know. And I just started looking through it one day, and all the pictures looked amazing. And I loved the way she talked about the food, and I just wanted to get started. And everybody in my family made fun of me because I couldn't cook at that point. I was still experimenting, but I was trying. And when I got into college and I first met my husband, I was still kind of in that experimental stage, and he makes fun of me for these wasabi mashed potatoes I made him while we were dating that were like so hot we couldn't even touch them. But back then my influences were a little bit more like Cooking Light and Food Network. So I had a lot of learning. I actually learned a lot from them, but now I gravitate a little bit more towards certain bloggers like Tegan Gerard at Half Baked Harvest. She has some amazing things and her photography is just to die for. I also really like recipes from Chrissy Teigen, who surprisingly has really incredibly flavorful recipes. Right now I'm super obsessed with Odette Williams and Erin Jean McDowell, who are bakers. And I've been doing a lot of baking. That's really my biggest passion. I love cooking, but baking is that's where it's at.
Yeah, I went to culinary school. I was never my plan to do that, but it just sort of struck me one day that I wanted to go. And so I went and I got a pastry degree.
Wow.
But when I was in college, the first thing I ever learned to cook was apple pie. And so pie was my thing, for a while.
Her apple pie is really amazing too. It stands up by itself and it's so spicy. It's super good.
But so since I've started cooking, I went to school and I worked at a bakery and I worked at a chocolate shop, and I think all of those experiences have really helped formulate the way I cook now. They've given me a really good base. But recently I kind of rediscovered my love of pies. I kind of stopped doing them for a long time, but in the past couple months I've been making a lot of pies, and I think that's kind of my thing. I've come full circle.
Now, you guys both mentioned you have families, and I do as well. And I don't get a chance to talk to any other bloggers or people that do podcasts all the time. So I wanted to ask you, is it hard for you to juggle doing a podcast and a family? I know that for me, it could be quite daunting. I've only been doing it for a month, and you guys have been doing it for a while. Is it difficult to juggle both?
So let me preface before I say this that you can't see, but I'm currently feeding my toddler off the side of the screen. But it's a huge burden. I mean, we purposely schedule our recordings around the kids and their activities. But Ashley homeschools, 4 kids, and they have a lot of activities, and we try to make, purposeful family time and stuff, but we have days, set aside for recording and editing. That being said, we cut out huge chunks of audio of the kids coming in the room and talking, or like 5-minute silences where we leave the room to break up a fight or get snacks or answer questions. So, I mean, my kids are still little, and you can hear them on the show periodically because sometimes, my toddler will sit in my lap and like cry, while we're recording. And sometimes we have to get creative, because like Ashley regularly records in the car while her kids are doing soccer practice. So, I mean, it's definitely a balancing act, but I think we're in a good place where, it works for us.
Thanks. This is kind of almost a part 2 to the previous question, but as people who have podcasts and, you're pretty familiar with food media and social media, what podcasts and Instagram accounts, any kind of food media, what do you guys follow? What cooks and chefs in the media do you guys follow?
Well, I mentioned at the moment Odette Williams and Erin Jean McDowell. I really love their Instagram accounts. They're beautiful.
You tagged her in a post and she liked it.
I did twice, actually.
Nice.
So that was kind of fun and exciting. Other podcasts that I really love, I like a lot of Erin Mankey's podcasts, like everybody. I really like Lore. It's really enlightening and interesting. I had been listening to one called The History of English, or The History of the English Language, I think, which is fascinating. It can be a little dry, but it's totally worth it for all the little nuggets that you get. I'm trying to think of other stuff that I love. Oh, I love like binge mode Harry Potter that goes into all the details about Harry Potter universe, and they just kind of like a funny take on it, but also just kind of fun to feel like you're having an adult conversation with somebody about Harry Potter,
Thanks. Great. Let's see. And any spoilers for any direction on the podcast where it's going in the future? Any spoilers you can provide for the audience to where you might be covering in the future?
We have this massive, absolutely massive Excel sheet with all of like the ideas we have. Every time we read or watch anything, we're constantly adding stuff. And so, I mean, right now we have, I think through season 4 planned out, but it's all kind of up in the air, just kind of whatever we feel like doing at the moment. But I can say soonish we will be doing our first of many Harry Potter episodes, and those should be pretty big.
Yeah, very epic.
All right. I wanted to ask you guys a question. It's not on the list, but I wanted to throw it in there. I noticed that you guys are both, if not huge fans, you're both very well conversed with Miyazaki films. So I wanted to ask you, I noticed that Miyazaki in his films uses food as a touchstone quite a bit. And I noticed that you guys when you guys talked about Ponyo, you kind of touched on that as well. What are your thoughts of, have you seen all, if not many of the Miyazaki films? And what are your thoughts on how Miyazaki uses food as a touchstone?
So I've seen quite a few of his films, and we even talked about this a little bit in the podcast, but Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli are very purposeful in the way that they present food. And they use it mostly as like a tool for comfort. And so usually when characters are in distress, another character will provide food for them. Like in Kiki's Delivery Service, when Kiki's sick, the woman she's with, makes her oatmeal and she puts honey in it. And speaking about kids, yeah. And in Spirited Away, Haku offers Chihiro a onigiri when she's upset that she thinks she'll never see her parents again. I think he also spends a lot of time making the food look like better than reality. I think as a way to kind of, I guess, romanticize and fantasize the worlds that he's created. And so especially in movies like Spirited Away, it's really interesting to see her be in this alternate plane of existence where there are spirits and monsters, but to see food that is very familiar to her and to her experience in real life, even, like what they feed the soot sprites in the boiler room are little Japanese candies, that you can actually buy in real life.
Touched by how purposeful, like you say, Miyazaki used food in the films, also to kind of provide like evoking emotion, I think, because I think that when we see food in a film or a book, when it's used, like it kind of stirs feelings in ourselves. It's easy to identify. When a character in a book or a film is hungry, you can kind of remember, like if you've ever felt hungry, like you can kind of identify with that. It's a shift in our perspective, and I think it's always very interesting to see how Miyazaki uses those in his films.
Yeah.
So for the last question, I want to ask you both, if you could do a dinner for up to 10 people, living or dead, who would you invite and what would you cook for them?
This was a really hard question.
We split the list and decided to have a combined party.
Yeah. First, I guess, for what we would make, we in my family have a very favorite creamy lemon pasta from Ina Garten. That's like our all-time favorite thing to eat as a family. So I think that we'd probably make that and some garlic bread and some salad. And then I think for dessert, I would make from Tegan Gerard. She has this chocolate peanut butter Oreo cake that is to die for. And it would be enough to feed everybody because it's gigantic. So I think that's what I'd make. What did you decide, Christine?
So Ashley was kind of making fun of me when we were deciding, our menus, because
I was just teasing.
I know she was like brought, I guess, to light our different styles in like cooking for parties and things. Hers, of which is like, our favorite family meals, tried and true, things we love. And mine is like, go big or go home, do something new, do something fancy. She's like lamb lollipops. So,
you have made those before for a party, in my defense.
I made chicken lollipops.
Okay.
Sorry.
So lamb lollipop sounds good too.
Sorry, hold on. She's
Okay. We could also edit.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. So what I decided on was, I didn't go that far with it, but I think I probably still went where I usually go. So I did caramel butterscotch pie, probably like some kind of big, beautiful roast, and like miso roast vegetables, and then like a bright citrus salad. I don't know why. Like that's kind of my go-to for dinner parties.
Sounds good.
Good to meet you.
So who'd you invite?
So I ended up inviting Walt Disney, Lin-Manuel Miranda, John Cleese, and both the Queen Elizabeths.
And those were all kind of shared ones.
Yeah, I mean, all of these would be interesting people to talk to,
Yeah. I did Dick Van Dyke. I felt like I had to include him because he's the only person I've ever written fan mail to. And then Mel Brooks. He was actually the first one we decided on, and he was a shared one. And then kind of my own personal ones, I guess, would be... my own personal ones would be like George Washington, and then Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh,
and
that's not a personal one.
Well,
that's
no,
for both
that
of us.
one's shared. But then Mark Hamill, and I'm thinking Mark Hamill, like, because I'm a big fan of Batman and his performance as the Joker in the Batman animated series. So.
Very nice. Well, thank you both for being here and talking with me. I really enjoy getting to talk to you and get a little more insight into your podcast. For those of you who have not yet listened to it, it is the Bitten Podcast. It is on Spotify and other media. Please check it out. You'll love it as much as I do. So I want to thank you both for coming, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I want to thank you for joining me today and talking with Christine Parker and Ashley Lee of the Bitten Podcast. I enjoyed it very much, and I really loved having them as guests and getting to ask them questions. If you have not yet listened to the Bitten Podcast, I recommend strongly that you do. It's very, very entertaining and also very insightful as well. I want you to join me next week when my guest is Roxana Jelipat. She has a new book out called Mother Grains, Recipes for the Grain Revolution by Norton. It's an excellent book that covers the usages of different types of grain for everyday cooking. It is a wonderful cookbook, and it made several things out of it, including a buckwheat banana bread that was out of this world. So please join me next week when I talk with Roxana Jelipat. Thank you, and I look forward to talking next week. This podcast is supported by funds from our sponsors and donations from our listeners. If you wish to donate, simply go to the donation box on the website and click to add money. We appreciate any funds. Thank you.